During World War II, railroads were playing a major role in hauling both freight and passenger traffic to help support the war effort. Most railroads used steam power, which was slowly starting to be phased out after the war ended. The one thing that didn't change, however, was accidents. Rail accidents varied from boiler explosions to runaways, rear-end collisions, derailments, and probably one of the most common were head-on collisions. The cause of these collisions varies sometimes. Crews miss signals, go onto rails they were not supposed to, or just a simple mistake of crews not timing their trains properly. Head-on collisions happened a lot in the 1800s and early 1900s until signals and dispatchers came into the picture. They would assist in telling the crew of the locomotive to slow down, stop, or go. The crews would also use timetables to predict when the next train would go through, which was a difficult process since sometimes the train could either be running early or running late. If they don't time the train properly, then they are in a big risk of getting into a head-on collision. The severity of the collision depends on the locomotive speed and the amount of tonnage they are carrying. If the train has little tonnage and is going at a slower pace, then the collision could be avoided or be minor. However, if the locomotive is at a high rate of speed and a good amount of tonnage, the wreck will be huge and the locomotives will be unrecognizable. Sometimes, though, locomotives get rebuilt from the wreck and have a second chance of life. Some locomotives, though, are too far gone beyond repair and are sold for scrap afterwards. This was pretty common during World War II since they needed as much metal as possible to build tanks, guns, bullets, cars, and trucks. However, despite this, a few fortunate locomotives did make it away, like Canadian National No. 3254, which is currently at the Steamtown National Historic Site. The museum retired the locomotive in 2012 due to a ton of mechanical issues that the mechanics didn't fix. This was due to a certain event that changed 3254's life forever.
On July 24, 1941, train number 17, the Canadian National Transcontinental, simmers at Seattle's King Street Station. The Transcontinental ran between Seattle, Washington to Vancouver, British Columbia, on a journey spanning 4 hours and 154 miles. On this day, the train was led by S1B Mikado, number 3254, crewed by engineer Herbert H. Mills and fireman Hilgeiner. 3254 was the fifth of the S1B series Mikados, built in 1917 by the Montreal Locomotive Works for the Canadian Government Railways, as engine 2854. Her first few years would be on lease to the Grand Trunk Railway until 1923, upon which she was sold to Canadian National and was renumbered and relettered to Canadian National 3254, alongside numerous of her other siblings. The S1Bs were very successful and capable locomotives, often seen in regular dual-service traffic. When built, 3254 had a boiler pressure of 180 psi, 27 by 30-inch cylinders, and 63-inch diameter drive wheels. With all this in mind, 3254 could produce 53,115 pounds of tractive force. Perfect for dual-service traffic she was designed for. After 2 blasts of her whistle, 3254 departs Seattle with the Transcontinental in tow at around 7:24 a.m., starting her 4-hour journey. Meanwhile, 154 miles north at Vancouver, British Columbia, Great Northern H5 Pacific number 1351 sits patiently to depart southbound for Seattle. Today her train is a stopping train called the International, consisting of a single mail car and 2 coach class cars. Crewing her today was engineer John Carey and fireman A. Hager. It's unknown how old her crew was, and was unknown for a long time, since these two were rookies at their jobs. 1351 was a Pacific-class locomotive built by Baldwin in 1909 as an E14 tin-wheeler, being quite a bit older than engines like 3254. She and some of her siblings were rebuilt into H5s in 1924 to keep up with the times. Designed for high-speed passenger services with speeds of up to 80 miles per hour, she had a 200 psi boiler, 23.5 by 30-inch cylinders, 73-inch diameter drivers, and 38,500 pounds of tractive force. 1351 would leave Vancouver Station around 8:05 a.m. Both Great Northern and Canadian National would share the same route between Vancouver and Seattle, making the 4-hour trek for 154 miles between these two cities.
Everything would go normal until the 1351's train got onto a siding to wait for train number 17, the Transcontinental, to pass before continuing. They pulled into the siding at Endo to wait as scheduled. After the train passed, 1351 was set to continue and started to trundle back onto the main. Her crew, new to their task, couldn't have possibly known that the train that had just passed them was not the Transcontinental, but was CN's number 1, 3254, with number 17, that was in fact still approaching, opening a can of worms that couldn't be closed. Up ahead, 3254 was making good time with the Transcontinental, traveling around 25 miles per hour, the speed trains normally ran at on this line because of all the frequent stops. Suddenly, 3254's crew caught sight of the light of 1351 up ahead in the narrow valley of Burnett River, frantically blasting warning whistles and slamming their brakes. Both crews tried to stop the inevitable, but alas, it was too late.
The two trains had a head-on collision with a combined impact speed of 50 miles per hour. Both locomotives were practically destroyed beyond all possible recognition. On the Great Northern train, the mail car plowed into 1351's tender and telescoped through it, almost completely crumpling the car into a heap of steel. The engine remained upright, but the smoke box was torn from the boiler, which was ripped from the frame. John Carey, the engineer that day, survived, but was severely injured. However, A. Hager wasn't that lucky, as he was killed almost immediately. On the Canadian National side, 3254 was jackknifed on impact, mangling both the engine and the tender almost beyond belief. One eyewitness even stated that the cylinder blocks were flung several feet away from the wreckage, and the piston rods were twisted and knotted in a grotesque manner, pointing skyward. As for the crew, both the engineer and the fireman survived, but the Canadian National baggage man, Harold H. Cranks, was crushed to death inside the crumpled wooden baggage car. After the accident, it was unknown who was at fault for this. However, Great Northern locals believed it was the crew of 1351 at fault, for since they were fairly new at their job. Due to multiple factors at hand, this remains unproven to this day. It is very likely that we will probably never know who was truly at fault for this tragedy.
As for the locomotives, 1351 was put into storage until being cut up for scrap in October of 1941 due to being damaged beyond economical repair. 3254, though, was very lucky to be repaired and brought back into service. However, the CN did not repair 3254 properly, and for its whole life, it had a bent frame and offset cab. She would run for the CN until 1958, when she would be officially retired from service. In its life, 3254 would be sent off to many owners until having its permanent home at the Steamtown National Historic Site. She did run excursions for the site until 2012, but since the Canadian National and Steamtown didn't do a full rebuild, she was deemed too expensive to repair and was placed on static display. They are restoring other steam locomotives to operation, but it's unlikely 3254 will ever run under steam again. Even though some steam locomotives get a second chance of an excursion career, sometimes they suffer from hard luck and are eventually retired. This accident really shows that doing little work on a steam locomotive can have its consequences down the line. From this experience though, we did learn a lot that doing a full restoration on a steam locomotive is very beneficial and can have a longer lasting life, while doing a patch-up job on a steam engine can change the locomotive's potential and won't last as long. Even though 3254 is now retired, thankfully we have the engine around for future generations to come, even after what happened 83 years ago.